I'm Nicholas Balassi with justthenews.com. Joining me now is Congressman Tom Massie. Congressman, thanks for taking some time to speak with me.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Really appreciate it. So there's a lot happening in the news. There's a lot happening in Congress. I first wanted to start with asking you about House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer. He's been talking about how Congress should be virtual by now. In situations like the pandemic that we're going through right now, do you see that happening? What's your position on the remote voting, remote hearings, and doing that all virtually in Congress right now?
Well, I prefer they show up for work in person. On March 27th, I called them all back to work. I said, if truckers and nurses and farmers and grocery store workers are working, then surely congressmen making $174,000 a year with free travel can show up for work. So I prefer to do it in person, but if they don't want to do it in person or they can't do it in person, then we should be doing this stuff telephonically or by teleconference. Look, every school child in the United States is attending school online. There are billions of dollars of banking transactions happening today, and even the Pentagon is doing telework. If the Pentagon can telework, then why can't Congress?
Now, your own party, you've got McCarthy, the GOP leader, saying there's cyber concerns with remote voting and conducting business virtually because there have been so many attempted intrusions into the congressional systems. What's your view on that? Are there national security concerns when it comes to conducting business in Congress, as well as actually voting and doing floor business on the floor virtually?
Well, if you're worried about somebody spying on your backroom deal, I guess that could be a concern. But look, what we do in Congress, 90% of it is publicly televised, as it should be. And really the only problem there might be a denial of service attack. And I think we could get around that, because C-SPAN broadcasts, it doesn't matter if they're, broadcasting remotely or from the hearing room. But no, I think what you're seeing, and I believe actually Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer don't really want to work remotely either. I believe what you're seeing is pushback from leadership because they can't twist people's arms through a telephone or through a teleconference. The sort of stuff they walk up to you and whisper in your ear, like, good luck with your election. Those intimidation things, they can't do over the phone. They also can't separate you from your legislative council. When I walk on the floor of the House, I can't bring staff with me, but the leadership gets to bring their staff. And so they're at an advantage when we start talking about what's in the bill oftentimes. And they don't want to give up that advantage either. So, finally, the other thing is they love to do voice votes and unanimous consent. But if you're going to do it remotely, of course it has to be recorded to each member in order to be secure. And they don't want to give up their excuse to have voice votes and unanimous consent passage of bills.
How often does that go on, the arm twisting on the floor, even at the last minute before the vote's actually cast?
C-SPAN doesn't show the roster that we get to see in the House of Representatives that shows how every person has voted. But I think it would be fascinating if people could watch the members change their votes in real time, which happens on the floor. If a bill's not passing and they want it to pass and they're only 10 votes short, they'll walk around and twist arms and get people to change their votes. That would be really hard to do by teleconference. And yet it happens all the time on consequential bills that are close votes in the House of Representatives.
So you think because of that issue and that situation, that's why we haven't seen an actual remote voting plan enacted? Is that where you're going with that?
Yeah, I mean, the defense that they present, whether it's Steny Hoyer, or Nancy Pelosi, or Kevin McCarthy, is incompetence. They're saying they can't do what every school child in the United States is doing right now. In other words, work online. I think it's a bad defense. The reality is they're covering up for what their real motive is, and their real motive is it's harder for them to do all of the things they've learned in the swamp if they have to do it remotely.
Do you think personally they'll actually come up with a plan during this pandemic, to conduct business remotely, or do you think that it's not going to happen?
Well, a couple of weeks ago, they said we were going to vote on it, on doing like proxy votes. And then they said, well, we're not going to do it because the Republicans are opposed. Well, guess what? That's never stopped them before. You know, we're in the minority. If they had the support of the Democrats, they could have passed it. The reality is, I think they were bluffing our side, and they didn't really want to do remote voting either. So when our side put up some objections, they folded very quickly. And so I think that's what you're seeing is bluffing. I also think you're seeing a little bit of bluffing on our side when you hear Kevin McCarthy repeating my talking points now, saying that we should come to work, that we, you know, if Americans are working, basically his talking points sound just like mine at this point. If truckers and nurses and farmers and grocery store workers are working, then Congress should work. The reality is they'd rather write the bill alone and then invite us back when it's time to vote on it. But my question is, if they're going to invite us back to vote when the bill's ready to vote on, who the hell's writing the bill? I mean, the American public hopefully can see through what goes on in Congress during these times when they see that we only come back for 8 hours to vote on a bill and then we go back to our districts.
Yeah, you took some heat from the President of the United States for wanting the recorded vote and going out front on that and saying, I'm coming back to Washington in person. And people were citing health concerns that, you know, members shouldn't be coming back during the pandemic. Why do you think you got the heat you did from the President of the United States? And has your view of the president changed at all because of that situation?
Well, my view of the president hasn't changed. Look, I think he was being misled and misinformed. People thought I was trying to delay the bill, when in fact, all I wanted was a recorded vote, and I wanted people to show up for work. And that's why I transmitted my intentions a day before I actually made the procedural motion, so that there would be no surprises. Look, surprises are for little kids at birthday parties, not for Congress. And so I told them what I was going to do. Now, the president got upset because he thought I might single-handedly tank the bill. That wasn't the case. But now you hear the president saying what I said on March 27th. He said Congress needs to get back to work. They need to show up and vote on these bills. And he's right about that. And I was right about it on March 27th. So no hard feelings here from Kentucky.
Well, when it comes to health concerns, if the members don't come in person and then there's no remote voting or system set up to conduct business remotely, then they do things like unanimous consent, voice voting. Do you think that's appropriate to do on a spending bill, especially ones that could be in the $1 trillion range, like the fourth package we might see soon?
You know, unanimous consent and voice votes might be appropriate for some procedural motions or for renaming a post office with a non-controversial name, but they're not appropriate for the biggest spending bill in the history of mankind. And so we've got to vote one way or another, whether it's remote, whether it's by proxy, or whether it's showing up for work. And also, you know, once you get inside that Capitol complex, it's probably the most secure office space in the world. Like, have the guards tested for COVID if you're worried about catching it from the guards, and then test all the members, and then put us all in that box, because it's a very safe and controlled environment. I don't know what they're afraid of. If members are afraid of each other, then get each other tested. But we're doing the nation's business. Look, there was a time not too long ago when they had a plan to stick us all inside of a mountain in West Virginia if things got really bad. Now the plan is to tell us to stay home and eat ice cream.
Did you like the way they handled the last vote on the PPP added funding? Was that well done in your mind, or would you have liked to see some changes there?
Well, at least the last vote got a recorded vote, and at least all of Congress showed up. Now, they blame me on March 27th for endangering everybody's lives, but who endangered their lives a couple of weeks ago when we actually showed up and voted? In fact, Kevin Brady asked for the recorded vote himself. They didn't want to even let me request the recorded vote. They knew the optics were bad. And so I agree with having the recorded vote. What they didn't do properly is we didn't have a debate on that bill in the committees of jurisdiction. And they also glommed together a bunch of different subjects into one bill. We need to have one subject per bill, And those bills need to be marked up in the committees of jurisdiction, and there need to be hearings.
You've mentioned that they stripped an old bill in the Senate and sent it over for the $2.2 trillion CARES Act. Could you talk a little bit about that for people who may not understand that process? Why did it originate in the Senate and not the House? And do you think that may repeat again with this fourth package that Pelosi saying could be between $1 and $2 trillion?
So on this last coronavirus bill, they subverted the spirit of the Constitution. The Constitution requires all spending or revenue-based bills to originate in the House of Representatives. The founders only wanted to allow the People's House to pass taxes. Well, they subverted that a few weeks ago by taking a House bill that had already passed, bringing it over to the Senate, stripping every word from the bill, and inserting the coronavirus bill, the CARES Act, into that. And that's how they got around the origination clause in the Constitution. And that's how they were able to originate it in the Senate. Then the House voted on it after that. I think we need to go back to the Constitution and originate these bills in the People's House. It might be a little bit messier than that, but that's the way the Constitution calls for it. And by the way, this is exactly how they passed Obamacare. You know, Obamacare, the courts ruled was a tax, but conservatives protested that it had originated in the Senate. But what they did with Obamacare is they took a bill that had to do with veterans housing that had passed the House, and they stripped the language from that and started Obamacare in the Senate.